What has been your most bone-chilling, hair-raising, let's get the hell out of here experience? Story 1. Possibly fighting a house fire and realizing that I had very hot feet. Through concrete-soled boots, my officer and I immediately noped the F out. Hot feet mean you're standing above a fire. As fire burns upwards, it's weakening the floor beneath you, so we were about to plummet into a basement fire. Story 2. I was walking from a local shopping mall to the train station so I could go home. The shortcut went through a huge long tunnel and was out of sight from the road, and wasn't used unless you knew the area. When I got to the tunnel, I looked up and saw one guy standing right at the other end of the tunnel, in the middle, just looking in my direction, like he was waiting. Every hair on my body stood on end. I felt like I needed to vomit. Before I knew what I was doing, my feet turned me around and started walking fast away. He started walking after me and said, "Don't worry, it's not like I'm murdering." I ran and walked right on the edge of highway in plain view of cars in case he ran after. I couldn't stop shaking for an hour. Story 3. I don't tell this story often, but this seems like a good place. Back in college, I used to drive up the Oregon coast on weekends, then just crash in my car when I got tired. I woke from a nap in the driver's seat, and something just didn't feel quite right. It was just dusk, and the light was fading pretty fast. I yawned and stretched, and as I did so, I turned my head to the side and just caught a face stalking down below my rear passenger window. I went to hit the lock button just to make sure, and in my panic, I accidentally unlocked the doors briefly and then locked them again. I stared at the window for a few minutes, knowing that someone was crouching just out of sight. Eventually, I started the car and thought I heard a scuffing sound. Whoever it was didn't reappear, but that was enough for me. As I noped out of there and pulled out back onto Highway 101, I glanced back, and the bald figure in a red t-shirt with something wrapped around his face booked it into the woods on the side of the road. That was the end of that weekend trip. I drove the 2 hours back to my dorm room, white-knuckled, hands locked on the steering wheel. I had to pull over a few miles down the road though, just to deal with the adrenaline shakes. Story 4. We were tearing down an old outbuilding / office on my in-laws' farm. We wanted to save as much of the lumber as we could to reuse in chicken coop. So we pulled a large piece of plywood off one of the walls and the insulation was crawling with hundreds of snakes. Said snakes immediately started exiting the walls towards us, a writhing horde. There are rattlesnakes on the property. We've seen them. I have never in my life noped like I noped at that moment. I pretty much teleported into the back of my Phil's pickup. 1 minute I was standing in the way of hundreds of agitated snakes. The next I'm considering if I could fit through the little rear window of a Ford F-150. Story 5. When I was a teenager, I was awoken to a sudden chaos in my house. I come out of my room to see my dad butt naked except for his red wings with a pistol in his hand, absolutely tearing through the house towards the front door. My mother swoops me out of the way and locks me in herself into my sister's room. Apparently, someone was trying to break into my window and had not realized my parents' window was right by mine. My dad woke up, grabbed the gun, and chased the dude down the street naked with the gun at 3 a.m., screaming, "I'm going to find you, mother effer." Pretty sure every neighbor called 911. Cops came and the police helicopter involved the whole 9 yards. Turns out the dude was some wanted person who had been outside my window long enough to have smoked a half of a pack of cigarettes. Probably the only reason he didn't get in was that we had storm windows, which is what he was trying to pry off when my dad woke up. They did end up getting him hiding in a neighbor's shed. Now, I was born when my dad was only 21 and I was probably under 15 at the time, so he's only in his 30s. My dad was a construction worker who was like 6'2" and he started going bald young, so he shaved his head and had a huge goatee. He was very menacing looking when he wanted to be. Thank God no one had security cameras at the time, because the image of that angry naked man with work boots on, running down the middle of the road kept the neighbors' tongues wagging for months as it was. This was the mid-90s, by the way. Story 6. I'm a criminal defense investigator. I had a murder case involving two brothers. The one accused of the murders was very autistic, and his brother was schizophrenic. The schizophrenic brother lived in a potato shack in the middle of the desert. I needed to talk to him several times throughout the course of the investigation, and since he didn't have a phone or electricity, I had to drive several hours out to his house and yell his name from the fence line until he came out of the shack. This investigation lasted for several years, and over time, I developed a rapport with the schizophrenic brother, and I kind of got to like him. He would talk your ear off about the aliens with golden eyes and the underground tunnels that connect all the war moths in the country, but he was pretty entertaining, and part of me wonders how much of it was a show. Schizophrenic brother eventually gets a girlfriend. She's a tweaker who has mistaken his schizophrenia for meth-induced psychosis. I talked to her a few times in jail when she was sober, and she was surprising, charming, and insightful. The last time I got to see schizophrenic brother, it was a dark winter night, and tweaker girlfriend is there. She's lurking in the shadows and staring daggers at me the entire time I'm talking to him. I cut off his conversation about the speakers in his feelings and walk back to my truck to leave. A minute later, schizophrenic brother comes running out and tells me that he wants to show me something in his shack. He's never invited me inside before, and I'm not thrilled by the prospect. The whole thing feels off to me, so I'll tell him I have to get going and start the truck. The look of relief on his face when I declined to go inside convinced me that tweaker girlfriend was waiting behind the door with a hammer or something. A few months later, I learned that she shot him asleep and stashed his body in an old refrigerator. She has since pled guilty to his murder. Story 7. When I was 27, my girlfriend lived in a crappy part of Hollywood, Florida, near US 1. She had a kid pretty young, but the dad ended up going to jail for assault. The place she could afford was run down as F, with all sorts of addicts and genuine lowlifes living in the units around her. She hated the place. She couldn't move in with me because I was just renting a room where I lived. It was better than living at her parents' though. Drunk abusive dad, addict mom. I went to visit her after my shift ended at 9 p.m. Planned to cook for her. We were there for about an hour, just sitting on the couch, watching her kid play with a box. Then, the banging started on the door. She looks terrified, thinking it's her ex. I'm also kind of freaked out because I heard all these stories about him. Some guy is cursing, hitting something against the door hard. We don't even want to peek through the window or peephole thinking he's got a gun. We call the police, but the operator is having a tough time hearing. Then we hear some other woman screaming and cursing. He had the wrong door. We hear them start fighting, smashing, more screaming. Sounds like she's spitting, and we hear punches. We're not sure if it's her or him, but it's loud. 911 operator says police are on the way. The kid starts screaming because he's scared. The man outside starts banging on the door again. He thinks his kid is with us and shouts he's going to kill us for taking his kid. My girlfriend just breaks down at this point and starts crying. Maybe 10 minutes later, the police arrive. They arrest both of them, then took our statement. She moved out a couple of days later, and we ended up renting another crappy apartment, but in a much better area. Story 8. I must have been around 10 or 12 when this happened. I was walking back home one afternoon, around 3 or 4 p.m., after strolling around the neighborhood, which was usually very safe, friendly, and quiet. I was on the opposite side of the block, which wasn't an issue because there happened to be a park that went across the whole block and connected to the other side, so I was only a few houses away. I went through the park, a park I had played at my entire childhood, without paying much attention. About halfway through, this guy, who I didn't know, definitely older than me, wearing a hoodie, started calling me. Dude, come over here one sec. What do you want? Come here, I just want to ask you something. Okay, ask me from over there. No, come over here, please. No, tell me from over there. At that point, another dude that was sitting next to him gets upset. I hear that's it. And they both stood up quickly and started making their ways towards me. I can't recall how far they chased after me, but my instincts just told me to run like hell, and I did. To this day, I still don't know if they were gonna mug me, if they were just mocking me, or whatever was happening, but it definitely scared the F out of me. Story 9. Back when my son was only about 1 year old, my husband worked second shift, so I was alone every evening. We lived in townhouses at the time and had a neighbor who was a war vet my husband was friendly with. He was a little off in the sense there was obvious PTSD and other traumas, but all around a nice dude. Anyway, one evening this guy knocked on the door. I opened it thinking he was probably looking for my husband and I was just gonna let him know he was working. Dude was super drunk, wouldn't stop talking and kinda made his way into the house. He also brought his huge German Shepherd with him. I was trying to be friendly, but I had the worst feeling in my stomach. I felt insanely vulnerable and like something just wasn't right with the situation. I kept trying to tell him in the nicest way to live, but he wouldn't. I texted my husband, "Hey, neighbor's guy here," and won't leave. He's trashed. I feel really uncomfortable. My husband texted his buddies that lived a few apartments down and they came over immediately. They got the dude out of the house and not even 20 minutes later, I hear noises outside and this guy is trying to rip the license plate off my car. My husband's friends heard it or saw it, I'm not really sure, but they came over and were more aggressive about him going home and leaving me alone. And he did, so I thought. Few hours later, my husband gets home and sees this guy hanging out crouched behind some cars. He goes up to him to ask him exactly what the F he's doing. I don't know the exact details because I stayed hiding in the house. It makes me sick to think that if my husband's friends wouldn't have come over as fast as they did to help me, my poor son would have watched something horrible happen to me, or even what he've even done to my child.